Okay, welcome everyone to Pathways Through the Orchard. Tonight is Parshat Mishpatim. This is the parsha that comes right after the giving of the Torah in Parshat Yitro. And we're going to start with the idea of juxtaposition. It's a very, very important concept in understanding the Torah. Why two portions are next to each other? Why are two mitzvot next to each other? Excuse me. What's the connection between the end of one parsha and the beginning of the next parsha? These are all matters of called juxtaposition. For those who have our book, The 70 Faces, there's a whole chapter on juxtaposition. So I'm mentioning that because that's how Rashi begins this parsha. And we're going to delve into even more connections between last week's parsha and this week's parsha, between the giving of the Torah and what is in this week's parsha. So the first thing, we'll look at what Rashi says. The parsha begins, Ve'ela hamishpatim asher tasim lifnehem. And these are the judgments that you shall put before them. And Rashi wants to ask, why does the parsha begin with a vav, which means and? And these are the judgments that you should put before them. Because you would think it's a new parsha. It should begin with, these are the judgments you should put before them. So Rashi says, he gives us a general principle. He says, if a portion or a passage begins with and, it's telling us it's connected to what came before it. But if it starts just Ela, these, not and these, but just these, it's telling us it's a whole new matter that's being raised right now. So since this parsha begins with the vav and ve'ela, so Rashi says, he says a number of things, but the two that he says are that we should know that just like the Torah was given at Sinai, so were all of the mitzvot in this parsha. Now this parsha has over 50 mitzvot. It's one of the three parshas that have the most mitzvot. This, Parshat Kedoshim in the book of Vayikra, and Ki Teitzei L'Milchama in the book of Devarim. Those three together have around 40% of all of the mitzvot in the Torah are coming in three portions. So this portion is obviously very, very important, just because of the number of mitzvah. So Rashi says it starts and these to make sure that we understand it's not just the 10 commandments that were given at Har Sinai. What we're learning is these mitzvot and all the other mitzvot were also given at Sinai. And that's why Rashi says it begins, and these are the judgments that you should put before them. A second explanation by Rashi is that the parsha before this ends with the idea of making an altar. And that's how the parsha ends. The idea of either making a earthen altar, or if it's going to be out of metal, it can't be made with metal instruments, because metal instruments represent war, and the altar brings peace between us and God. And that's how the parsha ends, with this idea of building an altar. This week's parsha begins with judgments. Now, who are doing the judgments? The judges. And what is the highest court in Israel? It is the Sanhedrin. And so Rashi says, from this we learn that the place where the Sanhedrin sits has to be right next to the temple. because the previous parsha ends with the altar that will one day be in the Temple of Jerusalem. And this begins with the judgments. And so from this, we learn that the Sanhedrin, the high court of Israel, was to sit right next to the temple. That's really what it was. That's how they learn it out. So that's the juxtaposition between the end of last week's parsha and the beginning of this week's parsha. But what we want to explore is that there's a lot more juxtaposition that we can learn out from the two parshas of Yitro, where the Torah is given, and Mishpatim, where, we did receive the 10 Commandments at Sinai, but here we're receiving more than 50 mitzvot. So we're going to go through a series of different juxtapositions that we can learn from these two parshas being next to each other. So the first one is the idea of general and particular. The 10 Commandments are, we'll call general. In other words, let's say the fourth of the commandments is to keep Shabbat. And it's explained in a very, very general way. It doesn't get into the actual practicalities of all the laws of Shabbat. That's done in the rest of the Torah. So the 10 Commandments are very general. It says you should not murder. Okay, so in this week's Parsha, for the first time, we hear the details of what happens if someone murders purposefully or by accident. In the 10 Commandments, we have you shall not steal. And so in this week's Parsha, also the beginning of the details. And so this is the idea of general principles and the details that go along with it. Now, when we say that, there's just a beautiful, we'll call it numerical gem in understanding the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments have 620 letters. That equals the word keter, the crown. And of course, in the Sfirot, keter is the highest of the Sfirot. So already this is telling us is that the Torah is coming directly from God. And one of the, what are called the three heads of keter, three levels of consciousness within keter, the lowest one is called ratzon, will. And we always say that the Torah is an expression of God's will for humanity. The mitzvot of the Torah represent the will of God. And so there's 620 letters. Now we know that there's 613 mitzvot, but there's two explanations. How do we get to 620? Either if you add the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach, the 7 universal laws to the 613, and those 7 laws also are very, very general, and they have many, many, many details. They're not really just 7 mitzvot. There are a couple score of mitzvot that are included in the general mitzvot. And the other one is that there are 7 mitzvot from the rabbis that were given the status of a Torah mandated mitzvah. And the way we know that is that all of them, 6 of the 7, have a blessing connected to them. And we say the usual Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Olam Asher Kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, that God makes us holy in his commandments and has commanded us. Well, these 7 are not actually mentioned in the Torah. These are mitzvot from the rabbis, but the rabbis felt that there was a support in the Torah for these 7, or they made it that these were as important as the Torah mandated. So again, 613 and 7 equals 620. So the idea is that each letter of the 10 commandments represents one of the mitzvot in the Torah. And there have been a number of attempts in history, as incredible as it sounds, is to take each of the letters of the 620 letters of the 10 commandments and to associate which specific mitzvah is represented by that letter. There have been a number of attempts to do this, which is really an incredible idea. So that's our first idea, that in Parshat Yitro, we have the general mitzvot of the Torah, all in 10. And these 10, in a certain way, are all inclusive of all the other mitzvot. We even say that all of the positive mitzvot emanate from the first mitzvah. I am the Lord your God who has taken you out of Egypt. And that because it's in the positive. And so that in a certain way, all of the positive mitzvot are included in that first one. The second one is a prohibitive mitzvah. You shall have no other gods before me. This is the command not to worship idols or any other power other than God, not to put our trust and our faith in any other power other than God. So we said that all of the prohibitive mitzvot emanate from that mitzvah. So that's the idea of general and particular. Parshat Mishpatim, our parsha this week, begins to go into great detail about some of these different mitzvot. Then we have, in a certain way, a juxtaposition between spiritual and physical. The experience of receiving the Torah at Sinai was the epitome of a almost unworldly, transcendental kind of experience. It was the archetype of spiritual experience. It was prophetic experience. We're told that the 7 heavens all merged and revealed themselves. And it says that the mountain was full of smoke. And the word for smoke is ashan, that the mountain was ashan kulo, full of smoke. And it's brought down in Kabbalah that the 3 letters of smoke, ayin, shin, and nun, represents the dimensions. Ayin is olam, the 3 dimensions of space. The ashan, shin, represents shana, year, time, the 4th dimension. And the nun represents nefesh, which according to the Sefer Yitro is the 5th dimension that science is just starting to pick up on. It's actually the cutting edge of quantum physics today, is the role of consciousness, of soul, in determining reality. So here we see a juxtaposition. Parshat Yitro is as I said, the archetype of spiritual experience. And Mishpatim is down to earth, the nitty-gritty of establishing a Torah-based society. The physical mitzvot, the practical mitzvot. So we see a juxtaposition here. Now, all of these juxtapositions, we should mention now, are like 2 sides of the same coin. The point is not to divide between spiritual and physical, between general and particular. And now we're going to add another one, between infinite and finite. The experience of Sinai, a once in history experience, was God revealing really in such a open way and in such a communal way the idea of God's infinite being. As we said, we're told that the seven heavens opened up, all of the dimensions merged together. And that was because God's infinite being was now revealing itself. And yet, in this parsha, in a certain way, everything is very finite. The mitzvot are finite. They're very delineated. They're very exact. we do mitzvot in a very, very exact way. When we delve into the halacha, every mitzvah that we do has so many different fine points. So here we have God revealing his, as much as human beings can receive it. We're actually told, the Midrash says that every word that God spoke, our souls left our bodies. It was beyond awesome. Awesome doesn't even really touch. It was so powerful, so transcendental that our souls just left our bodies. And we're told that angels came and brought our souls back to our body until the next word of God. And that's why after the first two mitzvot, the people came to Moshe and said, you talk to God. Let God speak to you and you'll tell us what God wants, because we can't live through this. And that, in fact, is what happened. According to tradition, we only heard the first two mitzvot directly from God, and the rest we heard from Moshe. And that actually is a beautiful explanation. We already said there's 613 mitzvot in the Torah. So we might think that the word Torah itself should equal 613 in Gematria, but it only equals 611. The word Torah equals 611. So it's explained the two that are, as it were, missing. These are the two that we heard directly from God. So when you add those two to 611, you have all 613 mitzvot. Another juxtaposition is the idea of that at Sinai, even though God did reveal the 10 commandments, and as we said, they're very general, but also in learning Torah, there's two aspects, two dimensions. One is called nigle, and one is called nistar. Nigle means revealed. Nistar means hidden. Hidden in the sense that we term it Kabbalah, or the mystical tradition, the spiritual meanings behind the mitzvot. So at Sinai, again, it was such a spiritual experience, an infinite type of experience, even though we did get 10 commandments, but because the whole experience was God's hiddenness was being revealed in as much a way that human beings could take it. And this week's parsha is what's called nigle, revealed, meaning the study of the revealed halacha, practical, down to earth, and again, two sides of the same coin. Without the nigle, without the revealed Jewish law aspect of the Torah, we have no nistar. The mitzvot, excuse me, when we get down to it, are very practical, very earthly, very of this world. And yet behind every mitzvah is a wealth of what we call kavana, of intent, of spiritual foundations. And this, for me, is one of my favorite ways of learning Torah, is to take a practical halacha and learn the spiritual underpinnings of each of the details of that particular halacha. And there's one set of books, not just one, but a very, very famous set of books called Likutei Halachot, that was written by the main student of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, Rabbi Nassan. And what he did is he took the Shulchan Aruch, the basic Jewish law, and the details, and then he explains the spiritual meaning of each of these details. I personally just love this kind of learning, because there's always the danger that if we don't understand the spiritual underpinnings of the mitzvot, that we could end up doing them very mechanically, doing them by rote, because we believe in doing them. God commanded us to do it, and we do it. But when we know the reasons behind it, it becomes so much richer. And that's why I believe it's today. You should have gotten in your WhatsApp, or if we didn't send it out yet, it will be going out shortly, about this idea, about learning the reasons for the mitzvot. So that's another juxtaposition, is the union, the two sides of the same coin, between what's called kavana and the actual action of the mitzvah. Every mitzvah has a kavana to it, an intent. And as I said, once you start delving into it, it is nearly infinite, the deep reasons behind the mitzvot. And actually, there's a beautiful, again, a gematria gem, is that the word kavana, which is a very, very important word, the idea of intent, the spiritual intent that we have when we're doing a physical mitzvah, or we're speaking a blessing. There's always the spiritual, psychological, emotional intent behind the action. So the word kavana equals 81, which equals exactly the first word of the Ten Commandments, which is obviously a very important word. Anochi, I am. And so the word for intent is the same as I am. So what is the teaching here? The teaching is by doing mitzvot, we connect directly to the one who commanded the mitzvot, to the Anochi, to the I am. I am God who has taken you out of Egypt, from the house of bondage. So a mitzvah connects us directly with the one who commanded us, the giver of the Torah. So I should just mention here that one of the ways we learn this is, if you take the four-letter name of God, a Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey, and you take the word mitzvah, Mem, Sadi, Vav, and Hey, so we'll notice that the last two letters are the same. Mitzvah ends with Vav, Hey, and God's name ends with Vav, Hey. So this is a good one for Yehonatan, who is our expert in Atbash. when you take the mystical alphabet of Atbash, where you exchange the first letter for the last letter, the second letter for the second last letter. So when you take the mem and the tzadi of mitzvah, the mem becomes yud, and the tzadi becomes hey. And so through this mystical alphabet, mitzvah and yud ke vav ke are the same. The mitzvah is what connects us. In fact, the word mitzvah, one of the meanings of the root of tzaveh is to connect. And this actually, especially in the cultural atmosphere of the world, is when you say the word command, immediately people are turned off, right? No one's going to tell me what to do. And here the Torah comes with 613 commands. So people just, especially in the Western world, is like, I don't want to be told what to do. So the other meaning of the root of mitzvah means to connect. So each mitzvah connects us to our own soul, connects us to the physical world. It connects us to God. And so that's a deeper meaning of mitzvah. So now I just want to start to go back and say a little bit about all these different juxtapositions. The last juxtaposition that I'm going to bring up is light and vessel, or and kli. The parsha of Yitro, the giving of the Torah, we have a verse, ner mitzvah v'torah or. A mitzvah is like a candle, a singular candle. But the Torah is or. So this is very much like we said before, like general and particular. The Torah represents light in all of its glory. And a mitzvah is a little light. It's part of this great light. So when we talk about mitzvot, if we were going to juxtapose the concept of a mitzvah to the Torah is light, and the mitzvah is the vessel for the light. It's a very, very important idea, because as great as light is, if there's no vessel for it, then it dissipates. So, in other words, if, let's say you lit a candle in a dark room. So the dark room, as it were, is the vessel. And so all of a sudden you go from almost 100% darkness, there's now light in the room, because there is a vessel that is able to hold it. Now, if you light a candle at noon on a sunny day, then in a certain way you see the light, but you're not affected by the light. So the concept is, another example is, let's say, water and a cup. If you have water and you have no place to pour it into, so you'll pour it, and the light and the water will just diffuse, because the nature of water is to seek the lowest common denominator. But if you have a vessel, then the water will fill it, and you can use it. You can drink it, you can cook with it, you can bathe with it, whatever it is. So this is a very, very important idea of what a mitzvah is. A mitzvah is a vessel that we could contain the light of the Torah. And the light of the Torah is the light of God. And that's why this beautiful thing we did with Atbash, showing that the name Yudke Vavke and the word mitzvah, when you exchange the letters, they become the same thing. The mitzvah becomes the vessel for receiving the light of the Torah, which is the light of God. So if you take the word light in the plural, it's orot. Orot. Orot equals 613. In other words, the vessel that holds the light are the 613 mitzvot. There are 613 particular, actually it's a general light, but when you do the mitzvah, it's like taking a piece of glass or a mirror and holding it to the sun. Well, the mirror is now going to focus that heat, and you could actually start a fire. So that's the concept of or and kli, light and vessel, Torah and mitzvot. Now again, everything we've mentioned about juxtaposition, and again, Parshat Yitro is all about the light, the experience of God revealing himself at Har Sinai. And our Parsha, Mishpatim, is about the vessels, the mitzvot, that become the way that we can access the light of God. Okay, so now it's really somewhat of an astounding concept. I think I've mentioned it before, but if you talk about light and vessel, and if you would ask, like, which one is greater? Which one is more important? Which one comes first? So the natural tendency, and in a certain way would not be incorrect, would to say, well, light comes before the vessel. But it's explained in Kabbalah when we talk about the cosmology of the Arizal, who explains that for an infinite God to create a finite world, the only way was through Tzimtzum, that God had to contract his infinite light and, as it were, create a space for finite reality. And that's called in English, the vacuum, the halal. And then we're told that into that halal, God shone a ray of light, and into the center of this seemingly empty space. But from that comes all existence. This is very, very similar to the concept of the Big Bang, where from one bang, however you're going to explain it, from one almost infinite speck of, we don't even know what to call it. Let's call it matter. But an infinite speck of something explodes, and we're told that all of the galaxies, all of the stars, all of reality came from that original burst of energy. So what's explained in Kabbalah is, first there's this vacuum, but we're told the word vacuum isn't really a correct. Vacuum means there's nothing there. According to Kabbalah, it's an oxymoronic statement to say that there can be any place that is empty of God's presence. nothing can exist from an atom to a cell, to a star, to a galaxy, to a human being, to an animal, to a plant. Everything is based on a spark of God. So in the empty space, there's what was called the Rishimu. My English just escaped me. Rishimu is, someone write it in the chats quickly. An impression, that's it. An impression of godliness, or a residue, an impression of godliness. But we're told that impression is the source of vessels. And then the ray of light comes in. In other words, this is such an important concept that, again, we would think naturally light comes first. And then we need a vessel to hold the light. And the way we experience it, that is true. It's not an untrue statement. But if we're looking for what came first, as it were, in this world, in a more transcendental world, so the light of God, the Or Ein Sof, comes before everything. There was no time, there was no matter, there is no space, there is no anything physical. It was all light. But when God created this existence, the vessels actually come before the light. And why this is such an important idea is to help us understand the importance and the opportunity of doing mitzvot. Because the mitzvot are the vessel. But this vessel is so primordial that in a certain way, it comes even before the light. And so to explain this further, I'm going to go back to this idea of the juxtaposition between the two parshas, between the, as it were, infinite experience of Sinai and the more finite experience of this parsha, which is talking about practical mitzvot. And that is, this. It's somewhat philosophical, but for God to be infinite, if God could not be finite at the same time, then he wouldn't be infinite. In other words, we might think of infinite as oxymoronic to finite. And that's why the Ari had explained there had to be this tzimtzum, because on a certain level, infinite is infinite. But on a deeper level, if the aspect of finite wasn't a part of God, then God wouldn't be infinite. He'd be lacking the ability to be finite. And so here again, we see we'll call it almost a mystery, the mystical understanding of the unity of light and vessel. Is light without a vessel becomes diffused. A vessel without light becomes empty. And so you need both of them. But we live in a physical world. We live in a world of vessels. And that's why this concept that the Lubavitcher Rebbe gave over when he explained the way to bring Mashiach. So he said, it's done by taking orot de tohu, the kelim de tikkun. In other words, the previous world called olam tohu, there was so much light that the vessels couldn't hold it. It was very similar to what happened to us at Har Sinai. There was so much light, we couldn't contain it. We couldn't handle it. And so those vessels shattered. The light shattered the vessels. So the Rebbe said, in order to bring Mashiach, we need that light. He said, Olam HaTohu is too much light, not enough vessels. This world is so many vessels. It's such a material, physical world. There's not enough light. Not enough light. So he says, so how do we solve this? By taking the lights of Tohu, meaning what it just means is our world needs more light. And so paradoxically, how do we bring more light to this world? Through doing mitzvot. And the mitzvot are the vessel. The mitzvot are the vessel. But the vessel is filled with the light of Torah. And the light of Torah is God's light. And so to bring light into the Torah, bring light into this world, we do it somewhat paradoxically through mitzvot. And there's 613 mitzvot. Each one is a different channel, opens up a different door, opens up a different way of accessing different aspects of the light of God. Now, one of the ways we see this, again, is in a numerical gem. When we talk about halacha, we talk about the idea of fences around the halacha. That we have the general halacha, and then in order to protect it, the rabbis made fences. In other words, it really goes back to Adam and Eve. There, it went awry. What do I mean? Is God told Adam, don't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Adam tells Chava, God says, don't eat from it and don't touch it. He added what's called a geder. The word in Hebrew for fence in this context is geder. So that didn't work out because according to the Midrash, the snake says, to Chava, are you allowed to eat from all the trees? She said, yes, we're allowed to eat from all the trees, but from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, we can't eat it and we can't touch it because if we do, we will die. And according to the Midrash, the snake pushed Chava against the tree and said, nothing happened. Nothing happened, just like nothing happened from touching the tree. Nothing, not only will nothing happen from eating it, but you'll be like God to know the difference of good and evil. So there, Adam added a fence. Later, the rabbis also, for the same reason, Adam thought he was doing good. He thought he was adding something in order to keep Chava far away from the tree. But nonetheless, the idea is sometimes the tikkun is in the very same act itself. Two examples from the practical world. If someone, chas v'shalom, falls off of a bike or falls off of a horse, so they say, get right back up on that bike or that horse, or you'll be traumatized. Let's say it was a traumatic experience, falling off the bike. But if that experience leads to fear for the rest of your life of getting on a bike or getting on a horse, then that is not a healthy situation. And the other example is, for those who remember, that in the desert, in reaction to the people's deeds, burning snakes came and were biting the people, and people were dying. And so God says to Moshe, make a staff and put a snake on it and have the people look at it and they will be healed. So it's very, very somewhat strange. Like the snakes are biting the people. Why put a snake on a staff? By the way, this is the symbol of the American Medical Association, the snake on the staff. That's where it comes from. But the idea was that by looking at the same thing that was harming them and looking through it, the whole idea they had to look up. And so therefore they would be looking up at God and that God would heal them. But it was through the snake. So this is just another example. So I'm bringing this because the word Geder, Gimel Daled Resh, equals 207. 207 equals or, light, and it equals Ein Sof, the infinite aspect of God. So here you would say, wow, this is, what a paradox. Here, these are these fences, very, very specific ways to guard the basic law. And it has the same gematria as light and infinite. So what it's telling us is that a mitzvah has in it the light. The mitzvah is in a certain way is the unity of light and vessel. In a certain way, it's the vessel for the light. But once the light enters in, the mitzvah becomes the light itself. There's no difference anymore between the light and the vessel. So this is a very, very deep understanding of the fences around the Torah. Meaning, and one of the places we see it in the most practical way is in the laws of Shabbat. We have 39 basic, what are called av halachas, primary categories of halacha that you can't do on Shabbat. Each one of these has scores, if not hundreds, of little details, and many of them are these fences to keep us far away from the main mitzvah that is forbidden. That's a practical example because Shabbat comes every week. And for those who try to keep the laws of Shabbat, so many of them are from the rabbis to protect the Torah mandated forbidden act. So that's an important example. Okay, one more idea here. One second. And this actually comes from Rav Ginsburg. And he said, actually, we mentioned it, I think, last week. The basic concept that if someone is not looking at the Torah from the inside and is looking at it from the outside and it doesn't really understand what these mitzvot are, doesn't understand what Shabbat really is, other than what they might have heard. And we said that if you look at it from the outside, then a person might look at Shabbat, this is just an example, and say, in the modern world, this is crazy. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. Like it doesn't fit the world anymore, or if ever. Obviously, someone who is observing the Shabbat and knows the bliss and the pleasure and the spiritual riches of Shabbat. So they look at the same mitzvot very differently. And in fact, it's all of the restrictions that pave the way for that spiritual ambiance to take hold. We're so busy running around all the time, I'll say 24/6, but some people 24/7, is everyone in the world wants some peace. But we're so wrapped up in the rat race, to use the common word, is how do you carve out any peace of mind from this constant struggle to keep up with the Joneses, to keep up with your payments, to keep up with your job, to keep up with your relationships? People are overwhelmed. That's Reb Shlomo's famous song. The whole world is waiting to sing the song of Shabbos. The whole world is waiting to sing the song of Shabbos. Truly, the whole world is waiting to sing the song of Shabbos. They just maybe don't know. Anyway, so Rav Ginsburg said the same idea, but he just formulated it in a different metaphor. And he said that for many people, when they look at the mitzvot seem dark. They seem without light. They seem maybe nonsensical, or I don't want anyone to tell me what to do. I have enough bosses in my life. I need another book to tell me 613 things, what to do and what not to do. So Rav Ginsburg says that, again, this is a metaphor, that with this kind of headspace, the mitzvot seem dark. And then that's what I was looking for. He brings a verse, and I just don't have it in front of me. I believe it's from Isaiah, where it talks about the treasures, that God will show you the treasures of darkness. And so Rav Ginsburg explains that, just like we said before, that the source of vessels actually precedes the source of light, at least in this world. So if we look at the account of creation, the light was created in the third verse of the Torah. But the second verse of the Torah, there's already darkness. And I believe that we had a whole series about light and darkness. So I'm not going to go deeply into it. But there's a place, and it's in the Psalms, and it's in Kabbalah, this idea that there is a primordial darkness that comes before the light. So that's what when we say Ein Sof, without end. And then we say or Ein Sof, the light, the infinite light. So in a certain way, the word Ein means nothing, nothingness. And so the metaphor is of darkness. But this is the darkness, what we'll call the womb. It's the darkness from which the light comes. Everything comes from this primordial darkness. So Rav Ginsburg explained that this verse, that I will show you the treasures of darkness, is talking about this primordial darkness. So it's the same thing. If we're observing the Torah from the inside, then we understand not only are the mitzvot not darkness, they are the greatest light. They hold the greatest light. So that was an idea that Rav Ginsburg brought down. And so I'll end with this idea that I mentioned before, but it's connected to the month of Adar that is coming. And on Thursday, you will get a Living with the Times about Rosh Chodesh Adar. Rosh Chodesh is on Friday and Shabbos. And so the Living with the Times will come out on Thursday. The word Adar is explained in Kabbalah and Chassidut to be read by the syllables, Aleph, Dar. The Aleph, meaning Alufo Shel Olam. God is called the leader of the world, the general of the world. In modern Hebrew, an Aluf is a general. And so God is the general of the world, the leader, the director of the world. He wants to come and dwell. Dar means to dwell. In modern Hebrew, an apartment is called a dirah, a dwelling place. So the Aleph comes and dwells. So before we were talking about the connection of infinite and finite. And so we were saying that God is infinite, is the only thing that is infinite. But for God's true infiniteness, there has to be a place for finiteness. And that actually is the purpose of creation. Because if the purpose of creation was only to spread the infinite light of God, there would be no vessel. There's no world, there's no anything. There's only the infinite light of God. So the fact that there is a finite world in a certain way is part of God's infiniteness. And we're told that the most enigmatic reason and really the deepest reason for God creating the world is V'hitaveh HaKadosh Baruch Hu liyot lo dira b'tachtonim, that God had a passion to have for himself a dwelling place. The same word is dar, of Adar. Dira b'tachtonim, a dwelling place in the lower worlds. And so this is, they once asked the Alter Rebbe, how do we understand God having a passion? And the Alter Rebbe answered, about God's passions, we don't ask. We have no idea. But we do have a tradition. This verse, this term, that God had a desire to have a dwelling place in the lower worlds, comes from a midrash from 2,000 years ago. There was already a tradition that mysteriously, that with all of the infiniteness, with all of the angelic realms, with all of the spiritual worlds, that God had a passion to have a dwelling place in the lower worlds. And that is our mission, our task, is to create a dwelling place for God in our heart, in our mind, in our soul. And I see that Nachum just posted the verse, Isaiah 45:3, and that was the verse. Hopefully when we get to the chats, I'll discuss it. So anyways, the month of Adar coming represents this idea of God's desire to dwell in the lower worlds. And this goes along again with all of the juxtapositions that we were talking about infinite and finite, spiritual and physical, light and vessel, Torah and mitzvot, the hidden Torah, Nistar, and the revealed Torah, Kavana and action. All of these, the purpose is to unite all of them, to unite physical and spiritual, light and vessel, infinite and finite. And so we should all be blessed to know what we're doing in this world, and to know the worth of a mitzvah. This is such a big teaching of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, as he sent his shlichim all over the world just to get people to do mitzvah. Put on tefillin even once, it could change your life. Come to a Shabbat meal, sit in a sukkah. Every particular mitzvah has so much light, and so many Baalei Tshuva, so many people who were not raised observant and who became observant, many of them, it happened because of one particular experience. Not everyone, but a lot of people had that seminal experience that just turned everything around. Everything around. That's the power of a mitzvah. So we should all be blessed to do many, many mitzvot.